Thank you all very much for being here, for the tremendous work that you do, and for hanging out to the bitter end of a conference which has been incredibly successful, and thank you. It's a wonderful, wonderful honor to be here, and I'm really impressed with what you are doing, and just thrilled to be part of this. I also want to thank my good friend John Petrilla for the remarkable contributions in this field he has made, not just in my state and in my country, but also in this community and around the world. So thank you, John, and thank you for the introduction. I might also be remiss not to thank my mentor, Hank Stedman, who's here. Much of what I'm going to talk about today really is a result of Hank's life's work. And he really, in many ways, has been the guiding hand of the work that we've been able to do in South Florida and now nationally. And I think one of the most frustrating parts, maybe for him and for some of us that are involved, is that we, at this point, have a pretty good idea how to fix the problem. The tougher part is finding and educating the people that can and will do it. And so I celebrate you having such a conference, but more importantly, letting me talk about this side of the issue, because it's only going to be through people like you and people like me that will significantly make the structural changes that I believe are necessary to fix what I believe is a pretty fragmented, antiquated system of care that actually contributes to people going to the criminal justice system when they really don't need to be. You know, when I became a judge, I had no idea I was actually becoming the gatekeeper to the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida. And sadly, that turned out to be the Miami-Dade County Jail. And we've looked at all kinds of studies. We know that people in the United States are 3 times more likely to be in a jail with a mental illness than a hospital. And as I prepared for my presentation today, I sadly found out that this is just not unique to the United States. But jails and prisons have become the de facto mental health systems in many countries around the world. Data from countries as diverse as Australia, Iran, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States confirm this. What I'd like to do before I get into the formal remarks of my presentation is show you a short video that was produced by a local TV station in my community that does a phenomenal job showing how horrible this situation is, and then we'll talk about how we're going to fix it. Please show the video, Maurice.
Now, live, this is CBS 4 News at 11.
Life here is dirty, deplorable, dangerous. Tonight, CBS 4 takes you to a place cameras are rarely allowed to reveal what's happening in our downtown jail to the inmates on the forgotten floor.
The people who spend their days and nights in these jail cells all suffer from mental illness. They're accused criminals, not guilty in the eyes of the law, but forced to live in conditions you cannot imagine.
Our chief investigative reporter, Michelle Gillen, has been given unprecedented television access to reveal what's going on. Michelle joins us now, and I was shocked, to say the least, when I saw this.
I think certainly it is time for the public to see what is going on. The pictures you are about to see are indeed haunting and most disturbing. Hundreds of men with mental illnesses, many crammed into tiny cells. Some arrested for minor crimes that advocates say would have the average person out of jail in just hours. But incredibly, there is no place to send them. Tonight, our cameras take you inside a world rarely exposed, the forgotten floor.
And then they get thrown into a cell.
Prison insiders call this the forgotten floor, but it seems unimaginable that the horrendous, be it horrifying conditions of a jail spilling over with inmates suffering from mental illnesses could be erased from any sane man's mind. As frigid air is pumped into sealed cells, some beg for help for the barest of necessities, water. The faucets are dry.
The water's not working.
The water's not working. He's drinking sewer water. He's drinking toilet water out of the toilet.
We'll get you water. It doesn't work, the faucet.
cells were designed for one person, outfitted with only a single steel shelf for a bed.
In this one, there's 3 inmates in a cell for 1.
Yet 2, 3, sometimes even 5 men diagnosed with mental illnesses, in most cases arrested for low-level felony crimes, in some cases misdemeanors, are locked up for days, weeks, months.
Tell me about you. Tell me, living in this, what do you want the public to know tonight?
I want the public to know that the people in here, they're urinating on the floor, and we have to sleep on top of it. They're defecating on the floor, and we have to sleep on top of it. There's only one bunker that's made of steel.
How many people are in your cell?
There is 4 in here right now.
They are only allowed out of their cell for 15 minutes 2 times a week.
30 minutes a week they're allowed out.
So other than a half an hour,
That's it.
this is it. They
Right.
are in this room.
Lights are on 24/7. The conditions you see just do not change.
I've been in Vietnam. I've been in Vietnam. I heard you about Vietnam. It's worse than this. I wouldn't put a dog in here.
A chilling perspective from the jail's chief psychiatrist, Dr. Joseph Portier.
You would think that in 2006, we would treat people with chronic mental illness in a much better, more humane manner. But unfortunately, we're reverting back to how it was in the 16 and 1700s, which is terrible. It's morally incomprehensible.
A sentiment echoed by an outraged Miami-Dade County judge, Steve Leifman.
This is like a secret that people don't
Yeah, it's a
know.
bad secret. And it's a sad secret.
What most of you don't know is that the Miami-Dade jail now serves as the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida. 3 of 9 floors burgeoning with inmates suffering from mental illnesses and, according to Leifman, in desperate need of treatment. Not this type of confinement designed to punish people.
5 times as many people in our jail with mental illness than any psychiatric hospital in Florida. 5 times.
In this, right here.
Right here.
An elderly man emerges from the dirt and darkness.
There's 1 on the floor underneath the bunk and 1 or 2 standing around waiting for their turn to sleep.
And the crisis has unfolded across the state. In other Florida jails where they strive to comply with all the national standards for housing inmates, frustration over the virtual abandonment of mentally ill inmates left by the state to languish in jail cells for months runs deep. Colonel David Parrish.
Can you imagine the chaos that would result in the local criminal justice system if I stood at the booking door and said, sorry, we don't have any more room, we're not taking them from you, law enforcement?
Parrish from Hillsborough County says local authorities had no choice but to sue the state of Florida to force the Department of Children and Families to comply with their legal mandate to transfer mentally ill inmates to a treatment facility within 15 days.
Jails should not be the de facto mental health facility for a county, but that's what they are in the United States.
You had your birthday here. How old were you?
I was 21.
21. And you've been here 8 months.
In Pinellas County, the weight of incarcerating and caring for mentally ill inmates has everyone paying a price, an unacceptable one, according to Major Kirk Brunner.
We are not a treatment facility, and these people that you saw in Delta 1, the one that talked to Zion, they need to be in a treatment facility, which is the responsibility of the state, not our responsibility.
And therein lies the danger. William Weaver Sr. was caring for his 40-year-old son Bill at home, a son he says suffered from schizophrenia but functioned well for decades until his medicine was changed. Then one night, according to police records, he attacked his elderly father, who called police and urged them to arrest his son, hoping this would trigger treatment.
Because he was under the false idea that if he got arrested, he'd get treatment.
Bill ended up locked up in a cell on floor 9 of the Miami-Dade Pretrial Detention Center for several months. According to authorities, Bill jumped from this top bunk bed, cracking his skull and breaking his neck. He's now a quadriplegic who needs hospitalization to stay alive. We met up with his father, who had just left his hospital bed.
Do you think anything has come from what the incident of what your son went through?
Nothing. Nothing's changed. Do I think something could change? I I don't know. I don't know. It's time. It's time. Something changed. But I don't know if it ever will.
My journey into the mental health world began one morning when I was getting ready to go on the bench. I was approached by the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney, and they asked me if I would speak to a couple whose son was in jail on a case I was about to hear. At the time, I was handling a misdemeanor calendar, which is a low-level offense calendar for people that are still stuck in jail. There's generally three kinds of people in that division. You have those that have attached serious felonies who are not allowed out of jail. You have those that are too poor to bond out of jail, and then you have those with mental illnesses that don't know how to get out of jail. So I brought this couple into my chambers that they had asked me to speak to, and they clearly were quite distraught. The mom had been crying, the dad was shaken, and they started to beg me to get their son help. At the time, I was relatively new. I knew nothing about mental illness or mental health. I was under the false impression that if you got arrested with a serious mental illness, we must have some system we would put you into, because I work in logic. And God forbid you had a heart attack in the jail, we'd send you to a hospital, but if you had a heart attack of the brain, I assume we did the same. The couple started to tell me about their son. They told me he was a brilliant man. He had gone to Harvard, had a late onset of schizophrenia, and was now recycling through our criminal justice system, and they just didn't know what to do. And they begged me, they literally begged me to get their son help. Being a little naive at the time and not knowing much about the system, I promised them that I would get their son help. As I began to go back into the courtroom to hear his case, the mom stopped me and said, "Your Honor, I need to tell you something else about my son. Not only is he brilliant, but he can be manipulative, but more importantly, he probably knows more about the system than you do, because you see, my son is the former head of psychiatry at the largest psychiatric hospital in Miami-Dade County." I was clearly taken back. I went into the courtroom and I called his case. And he stood and we started to have a remarkable conversation. If I wasn't looking at him, I was listening to a brilliant Harvard-educated doctor, and we were having a fascinating conversation. He was clear, he was coherent, and I was sitting there thinking, my God, is there something wrong with his parents? It just doesn't make sense. Except when I looked at him, it was clear he was homeless and had probably not bathed in 2 or 3 months. And he said, "Your Honor, whatever I've been charged with, I clearly didn't do. I've been in jail for a long time, and it was some ridiculous minor offense that you couldn't even go to jail more than 60 days if he had been convicted." And I said to him, "Well, I'll consider releasing you, but I do have a question for you." He said, yes, Your Honor, anything." I said, "I just don't understand one thing," because he kept insisting that there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. So I asked him, why would a Harvard-educated doctor be recycling through our jail on a regular basis if he didn't have a mental illness? Clearly, whatever I said triggered a crisis right before my eyes. He got a look on his face that I can only describe to you as someone who must have thought they were about to die. And he started screaming at the top of his lungs, "Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor! Get that couple removed, get that couple removed, get that couple removed!" Pointing to his parents in the back of the courtroom. And I said to him, "Aren't those your parents?" "No, no, no!" And he screamed like a wounded animal forever. "My real parents, my real parents, my real parents, they died in the Holocaust. And these two are here from the CIA and they came to kill me today." And by the look on his face, it's clearly what he believed. His mom was crying, his dad was crying, Everyone in my courtroom was shaken. I had no training on what to do with people with mental illnesses because before the court got involved, judges weren't trained. I did the only thing that I had been taught to do: order a psychological evaluation, which many of you know well about. But nobody told me what to do afterwards. First evaluation came back a week or two later. He was incompetent to stand trial. He needed involuntary hospitalization. I'm thinking, this is great. I'm going to fulfill the promise I made to his parents. I'm going to get him into treatment. We're going to live happily ever after. At the time, I needed 3 evaluations to be able to get everyone to agree on his condition. I ordered 2 more. He's now in jail, 6, 8, 10 weeks on possession of a dairy cart. All 3 evaluations come back. He is incompetent to stand trial. He needs involuntary hospitalization. I'm like, this is great. I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to take care of this guy. It's going to be wonderful. I hand a copy of the evaluations to the lawyers. I ask them to stipulate that he is in fact incompetent, which they immediately do. And I begin to order him into hospitalization. I look down. I notice that the assistant public defender has a grin on her face. I will tell you, as a former assistant public defender, the grin is a really bad thing. She then utters those magic words that, unless you're a lawyer, you may not appreciate. She says to me, "Your Honor, in all due respect." Now, for those that have been in court, you know that it has nothing to do with respect. She says, "You can't do that." And she whips out a Florida Supreme Court case, and she hands it up to me, and I take a look, and I read it, and it makes absolutely no sense. So I take a break. I go call my legal staff. I ask them to pull the case. I'm on the phone for what seems an eternity, and finally my lawyer comes back, and she says, "Your Honor, I totally agree with you." I said, "Excuse me?" She says, "Yes, the case makes no sense at all, does it?" What the case basically said, a county court judge, which is the lowest level of courts in our state, the judges have absolutely no jurisdiction to involuntarily hospitalize anybody, that I needed to send him out on a conditional release to go have his competency restored someone and wish him well. At the end of the opinion, the Supreme Court basically said, "We know it's not a great opinion, and we really urge the Florida legislature to take up this issue because it's not a good one." That case came out in 1999, and they still have not taken up the issue. And what it said is that I could do nothing. I couldn't leave him in jail because I couldn't try him. I couldn't hospitalize him because I had no authority. He walked out the room that day. I never saw him again. I don't know if he's dead. I don't know if he's alive. Not only was I unable to fulfill the promise I made to his parents, I put him at risk, and I put my community at risk. And I will tell you, it's something that judges do not want to be part of. I left the bench pretty upset that day. I got on the phone, I made calls, and I learned 3 very, very valuable lessons. The first lesson I learned is that Miami-Dade County, it turns out, has a very serious mental health crisis. We have the largest percentage of people with mental illnesses of any urban area in the United States. It is almost 3 times the national average. 9.1% of my general population, that's 177,000 adults and 55,000 children, have a serious mental illness in my community. And because the state only provides treatment to 1% of the people in Miami-Dade County, the Dade County Jail has become the largest psychiatric facility in my state. On any given day, I have almost 1,200 people on antipsychotic medication. We spend $160,000 every single day. That's almost $60 million a year to warehouse them in the conditions you saw on that screen today. And because the conditions are not conducive for treatment, people in my jail and most jails in the United States with a serious mental illness generally stay anywhere from 4 to 8 times longer at 7 times the cost than someone without a mental illness for the exact same charge. And because we had done such a lousy job training our law enforcement, since 1999, we've had 21 people with serious mental illnesses die during encounter with law enforcement because the police were not trained appropriately how to handle the matter. This was my first lesson. The second lesson I learned is that this was not a local problem. As it turned out, it is a national problem as well. Our former Surgeon General once said, mental illness is the silent epidemic of our time. But I tell you, if you work in the criminal justice system, there's absolutely nothing silent about this problem. And the third lesson, which is the greatest and probably most difficult, is my state's community mental health system, like most states in the United States, community mental health systems were developed more than 40 years ago when most people with the most serious levels of mental illnesses were still in hospitals. They are antiquated, they are fragmented, and they do not adequately handle the people with the highest degree of mental illnesses that end up in our criminal justice system. I'd like you to indulge me just for one moment. I'd like to read from an article on mental health that I recently reviewed. It says, the past few years we have seen an increasing amount of interest manifested in mental health and psychiatry. The existing legal procedures treat a person with mental illness as a criminal instead of a person who is ill. Booking a mental health patient at a police department is unnecessary and undesirable. Police should be replaced by trained representatives of hospitals to effect transfers and to go to their homes and to make sure that trained professionals are dealing with people with mental illnesses instead of police. All laws concerning mental hygiene should be integrated to eliminate inefficiency and duplication. In the past, psychiatry has suffered because of its isolation from general medicine. Integrating psychiatry into the general practice of medicine is in line with modern trends of medical education and hospital practice. The article goes on and says it's important that we train parents, that we train children, that we train teachers and physicians, that we train judges and jurors so they have a better understanding about mental illness, that we train clergy, employers, and in public in general. And these are just a few comments and recommendations that were published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in January of 1939. 75 years ago, we recognized that this should not be the way. But sadly and tragically, when it comes to developing and funding appropriate mental health systems in my country, we have lost ground, and frankly, in many ways, we are worse off today than we were 75 years ago. You all understand probably our history as well as anyone. It's a tortured history for people with mental illnesses. We went from having jails, the primary places for people with mental illnesses in the 1800s, to the community, to hospitals, and now back to jails. Similarly, through regional human rights in Europe, systems in Europe, laws and rules have been established encouraging the deinstitutionalization of psychiatric hospitals without providing viable and appropriate alternatives. And the impact of these policy changes have been staggering. In the United States in 1955, there were some 560,000 people in state psychiatric hospitals. I'm not arguing we go back there. At that time, there were less than 5,000 people with serious mental illnesses in our jails and prisons. Today, we have less than 40,000 hospital beds in the United States. However, last year, 1.5 million people with serious mental illnesses were arrested, and on any given day in the United States, we have approximately 750,000 people with serious mental illnesses in jails or prison, and another 1.25 million people on some type of probation or community control. We have closed more than 90% of our hospital beds, and we have seen a corresponding growth of 400% of the number and percentage of people with mental illnesses going into our criminal justice system. So ironically, two horrible things happened. One is we never deinstitutionalized. What in fact we did is we transferred the responsibility of these individuals from really bad, sometimes horrible hospitals to really bad, horrible jails, making it more difficult for people with mental illnesses to recover because now they have to deal with the double stigma, one, of having the mental illness, and two, being a criminal with mental illness, making it harder to get housing, making it harder to get employment, and making it more likely they will continue to recycle through our system. And the sadder irony in the United States is that we have now gone full circle. 200 years may not seem like much to you, but for us it's a very long time. And it is the one area in civil rights in our country we have actually lost ground and gone backwards on, and we have failed those with mental illnesses miserably. As noted by authors Gostin and Gable, worldwide, we have substituted one human rights concern, civil liberties issues surrounding involuntary confinement, for another, that being the consequences of deinstitutionalization, prison suffering, drug addiction, reduced access to community treatment, and homelessness. We have seen homelessness increase. We have seen police injuries increase. We have seen police shootings of people with mental illnesses increase. We have wasted huge critical tax dollars. And in many ways, we have made mental illness a crime in my nation. In my state, the police actually initiate more involuntary hospitalization calls than the total number of arrests that they make for robbery, burglary, and grand theft auto combined. And if this wasn't disturbing enough, just consider the fiscal impact this is having on our community. We asked John Petrilla and the folks from the University of South Florida, Florida Mental Health Institute, to do a little study for us. We were very interested to see if we could wrap our arms around the highest utilizers of mental health services in my community, because the idea was that if we could do that and we could more efficiently treat those that were accessing the deep acute end of treatment, we could get better outcomes and use our resources more wisely. To my shock and amazement, knowing that we had the largest percentage of people with mental illness of any urban area in the U.S., I got a report back and it was only one page. So I figured we either didn't pay them enough or there was a shock. And I opened up the list, and there were only 97 people on the list. These 97 individuals, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizophrenia, over a 5-year period in Miami-Dade County were arrested almost 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail, 13,000 days at some type of psychiatric facility, cost taxpayers almost $13 million, and we got absolutely nothing for it. I can almost guarantee you that everyone in this room has a 97 that are again and again and again accessing the high end of your services. And if this wasn't bad enough, consider what we are spending in Florida to restore competency through forensic hospitalization. Each year in Florida, we have approximately 3,400 people who are deemed unfit or incompetent to proceed. In our system, they have to go to a forensic facility so we can restore their competency so we can get them tried. We don't do this to get them treated, we do this to get them tried. My state is now spending almost 1/3 of its adult public mental health dollars, which is between $200 and $250 million a year, to restore competency for some 3,000 people. At any given time in Florida, we have almost 170,000 people who, at the time of their arrest, are in need of acute mental health care treatment, yet we spend 1/3 of all of our money to restore them. And as it turns out, when we studied this at the Supreme Court, between 80 and 90% of those individuals come back to the local community once they've been restored, and either the charges get dropped because the witnesses disappear, they get what we call credit time served for the period they've been in the hospital, and they are released without access to treatment, or they go on probation or community control without access to treatment. It actually meets the definition of insanity, where we keep doing the same thing again and again and again, and we expect a different outcome. And we're not alone. Nationally in the United States, over $3.2 billion are spent each year to restore competency. And what happens? As the prison growth has continued massively over the last 10 years, that we're seeing some slowing down now, except in my state, the legislatures don't raise new taxes to build more facilities. They take services away from the community mental health system and they move them over to the forensic system, creating a recycling effect, making it more difficult for people to access treatment and more likelihood that people with mental illnesses will end up in our criminal system. And what's even worse is when we looked at our prison system. The fastest growing subpopulation in Florida's prisons are people with mental illnesses. It has grown by over 170% in the last 10 years. We went from almost 8,000 prisoners with serious mental illnesses 10 years ago to more than 18,000 this year. It is growing so fast that they are projecting it will double again over the next 10 years. The cost to build and operate 10 new prisons in Florida for a 10-year period is $4 billion. The average stay for someone with a serious mental illness in prison in my state is only 2.5 to 4 years. We're thinking about spending $4 billion more to warehouse people for 2.5 years and then let them come back to the same community mental health system that was inadequate, which led to them to end up in our system. You know, there's something terribly wrong with a society that is willing to spend more money to incarcerate people that are ill than to treat them. So how do we fix it? And why judges? I think Hank Stedman was the first one to recognize that most of the reform that's going on in the United States, ironically, is not from our legislative branch, not from our executive branch, but from our judicial branch. And because we, like police, are the first responders now for most people with the highest and serious acuity of mental illnesses. We have judicial ethics that require us and should require us to do no harm. We almost need to have a motto like doctors. And as we have been forced to handle so many more cases of people with mental illnesses, it has required us to begin to learn about these issues and how to handle them more appropriately. The canons of ethics at every bar in the United States say that judges are allowed to get involved in issues where there is a direct impact or effect on the administration of justice. And nothing more could be more impactful than people with untreated mental illnesses coming into our system. Now, judges by nature are a pretty conservative bunch. So the last word we ever want to be called or heard is activist. It will send chills down one's spine and probably get one removed. So how do we do it? We've done a couple things. For me personally, I went and met with my chief judge locally to make sure I had their permission to move forward. And then on a national level, we had a meeting with all of the chief justices of all the state Supreme Courts who meet on a regular basis. And they unanimously passed a resolution a few years ago giving judges permission to become involved in this issue. And it has helped tremendously to give us the authority to do what we're doing. And while more and more judges are becoming involved in the issue, the reality is that none of us can fix this alone. This truly takes a collaborative effort between the judiciary and all the non-traditional stakeholders. That includes law enforcement, the state attorneys, the prosecutors, the defenders, the corrections, our children and families departments, local and state governments, mental health providers, family members, consumers, administrators, and everyone else that touches this system. For many years in my own community, there was a clear recognition that our community mental health system was a disaster. And with the help of a grant from then Gain Center, also known as Policy Research Associates, that Hank is president of, I literally begged him for the last grant they had that year, and he sent me 3 experts to help us map out how our community mental health system intersected with our criminal justice system, which it did not. I have to tell you, I had tried this 10 years earlier when I was an assistant public defender. I remember vividly inviting all these important people to come to a meeting to discuss this issue because my age tracks deinstitutionalization in the United States. And I saw as a lawyer first that I was getting more and more clients with serious mental illnesses, and they were just beginning to recycle again and again. So I set out this very important letter, and I was very pleased with myself. And not only did no one come to my meeting, no one even had the decency to tell me they weren't coming. Well, I guess to their shock and mine alike, about a year later I was appointed to the bench. And I ended up with this case. And I took the same letter and I put it on my news stationery with a big fat gold seal. And I sent it out, and they were there early. And it just shows you how important it is to have someone in your community that's willing to be a community leader, to help bring people to the table to discuss this issue. But what was most impressive about our summit is that everyone agreed we had an enormous problem. And the problem was that everyone was so busy doing their job that no one was paying attention to the one individual that was accessing every different system represented in that room. The judges were judging, the police were policing, the prosecutor prosecuting, the defender defending. And this one poor soul kept going through all these systems again and again and again. The story of the psychiatrist I told you epitomized our system. We were embarrassingly dysfunctional. So we analyzed our system through this mapping process. We produced a series of goals based on something they did in Seattle. They took a bunch of folks like you and me, and they sent them to a local park. They took their shoes and their wallets and their purses and identification away from them, and they said, okay, you have mental illness. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you need to be in court. At 10 o'clock, you need to go see your probation officer. At noon, you need to go over to your psychiatrist, and at 2 o'clock, you need to pick up your prescription for your treatment. And if you think about it, we've built systems that work for people that are not sick. We have not built systems that work for people that are so sick they can't even get to court when they need to be there. We signed a cooperative agreement with a signing ceremony. We gave jail tours to all of the policymakers in my community. We began to collect as much data as possible, and we started to look at technology as a way to help us manage the population. And after many task forces, judicial committees, 3 grand jury reports, and a mayor's task force, we created a program with the simple goal that reads, diversion and linkages to comprehensive care makes jail the last resort. And we set up both pre- and post-arrest diversion programs. We set up a training for 911, that's our police intake call system, to train the call takers to get a better idea if the call may be involving mental illness so that they could get a specially trained officer sent. We set up 3 post-arrest diversion programs, one for misdemeanors, one for felonies, and one for people who otherwise would have gone to a forensic facility for competency restoration. We started looking at our adult living facility care and our housing issues to see where we could begin to place people. We developed the staff. We began to look at intensive case management. We had to deal with immigration issues being in Florida. We set up a computer system to start to link us. We started to do research. We even came up with an idea that we needed to do a voluntary ID system so I could help people get their benefits. We set up a program for housing with my homeless trust. We started meeting regularly. We learned how to do SOAR, and if you're not familiar with that, that's a federal benefit process where we help people get their benefits so when they're released, we can help them get their treatment and their housing. We started to get federal money. We got the state to lease a building, a former state hospital, to the county, and we got the taxpayers to pass a $22 million bond issue to build what we believe will be the first of its kind, possibly in the world, a forensic diversion facility just for people with mental illnesses. It'll be part jail. It'll have a short-term residential. It'll have a crisis stabilization unit. It'll have a meaningful day activity program for people with mental illnesses. It'll have an employment program to help teach skills, and possibly a housing unit outside to provide supportive housing. We started looking at other ways for the people that we couldn't get to as easy, and we started experimenting, or piloting, I should say, with a grant from Bristol-Myers Squibb Foundation. Many of you may have heard about it the day before by Sarah and Richard, to see if we could add as an overlay to our traditional services mental health care to deal with some of the criminogenic risks by inserting cognitive behavioral treatment services. And so far, the early signs are promising. We began to look at better technology, and we've now instituted an electronic utilization management system, which just went up, which is enabling us to begin to start to get a better idea of tracking these individuals on a better way. And we are now being used as a beta test site in Miami to see if predictive analytics can be used to help manage this population. Our outcomes have been overwhelming. We have over 3,900 police officers now trained in my community on how to identify someone with a mental illness, how to de-escalate a situation, and where to take them if they need to. Last year, 2 of our 36 police agencies, the 2 largest, handled 10,000 mental health calls in my community. Yet they only made 45 arrests. Our jail audit plunged this year from a high of 7,800 to 4,800 last week. So good that we actually closed one of our jails, in providing what I would consider a real saving, which is not always easy to do in this field, of almost $12 million annually by closing that jail. Since 2001, we have served over 4,000 individuals in our post-arrest diversion programs. Recidivism rates among program participants has decreased from over 75% to 20%. Our felony diversion program has saved Miami-Dade County 35 years of jail bed days and $1.5 million a year in cost avoidance. Our recidivism rate in that program is holding at 6%. And as a result of all these changes that we have made in our community, we have improved public safety, we have reduced police injuries, we're getting our police officers back to patrol quicker, we're saving critical dollars, saving lives, and most importantly, we are decriminalizing mental illnesses. But we still have a long way to go. Through much of the research that Hank and others have done, it is clear that if a community is going to truly get their arms around this problem and get the kinds of outcomes that I think all of us desire, we need to have what I call the 10 essential elements that a community needs. We use this in a report that we did with Hank. We used it in our Supreme Court report. And it includes things like making sure we have a proper diagnosis and treatment plan, that we have intensive case management services, that we assure that trauma-related services are available for this population, because we know that the levels of trauma of people with mental illnesses in the criminal justice system is through the roof. One study done by one of our federal agencies suggests that almost 92% of women in jail with serious mental illnesses have serious trauma issues, usually sex abuse as children. So think about what we're doing. We take a little girl who's abused. She has severe PTSD as a result of her trauma. She begins to act out at school because no one's getting her treated. She gets thrown out of the class because she's disturbing the other kids. She eventually ends up getting thrown out of school entirely. She ends up on the street. She turns to drugs. She turns to prostitution to pay for the drugs. And she recycles through the criminal system her entire adult life because she was assaulted as a little child, and we didn't know better to get her treated. We need meaningful day activities. We need to deal with long-term institutionalization. We need supportive housing. We need supportive employment. We need to address the clinical and criminogenic factors that many of these individuals come with. We need a coordinated criminal justice response through diversion and mental health courts and crisis intervention team policing. And we need to use advanced technology to begin to end the fragmentation in our community systems. We know that there are many, many outstanding challenges, but we believe if we are to implement all of these essential elements in our community, and that we will finally accomplish what our United States Supreme Court asked us to do 40 years ago when they essentially ordered the deinstitutionalization of our hospitals. Thank you very, very much.